weed was made by God. Stephen A., I know you had a lot more to say on this subject.
Well, first of all, like I said, I want to reiterate, I'm not calling his comments dumb. I'm saying that it was a dumb time to do that. It was ill-advised. This is not the time for him to be saying that with the residue of the protest and all that it caused, and it involved the president last year, and it affected ratings to some degree. That's undeniable in a lot of people's eyes, plus the fact that his brother has legal issues that are pending as we speak. So it's just not a wise thing for him to say. But I want to get back to something that Max said that I find to be very, very important, because he talked about how, you know what, you understand. You understand, which I appreciate, Max. You understand that somebody like me is telling them to weigh the risk, weigh the odds, et cetera, et cetera. You got to take into consideration. There's a time and a place to do everything. Whereas you're more prone to just say, just speak the truth. Just say what it is that you got to say. Well, you know what, Max? I played for a coach, legendary Clarence Big House Gaines, God rest his soul. He was somebody, he's a legend and an iconic figure. The person that was a mentor to him was the great John McClendon, God rest his soul. These are individuals who contributed to the integration of basketball. And I remember both of them sitting me down one time. This is before I ultimately met the great John Chaney and my man Sonny Hill in Philadelphia and other basketball historians and others. Before that time, I sat down in Coach Gaines' office with these two individuals, and they said the truth shall make you free. No doubt about that. You got to speak the truth. But you also got to know when you're us, because the rules are different for us. And that's something that's not talked about nearly enough. White folks who happen to be Jewish, those who happen to not be Jewish, and the like, you live in a different bubble. It's not negative. It's not bad. It's not a knock against folks. It's not to say that nobody has suffered but the African-American community, but you come from a different place and you come from a different world. And the kind of mistakes that you could end up making doesn't end up costing you the way that it cost us. These are the kind of things that African Americans throughout this country have lamented for decades, if not centuries. It's our reality. And so when I sit up here on national television and I'm getting on somebody about pulling their pants up, or not having gold teeth in their mouth, or not having tattoos on their face and their neck and their head and all of this other stuff, or not smoking weed or anything like that, sure, you and others could tell them, go ahead and do it. You understand what I'm saying? You should have the right to do it. And theoretically speaking, you're right. But from a literal perspective, what kind of damage is it going to cause people? When I tell people, listen to Joe Madison, or listen to Karen Hunter, or listen to Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, or the list goes on, and I bring up these kind of things, I'm not literally saying that everybody's right all the time. I'm just saying that you have to take into account the collateral damage, and you have to weigh that. You can never ignore that when you're us. That's all I'm saying.
I'd like to respond to that philosophically, generally, and then take it back to specifically what we are discussing here, which is Bennett's comments on marijuana.
Okay.
Generally, first, philosophically.
Yes.
Martin Luther King Day just passed, not long ago. Martin Luther King today is celebrated. His day is celebrated as a national holiday. In his day, and today he is perceived as relatively tame, certainly not the radical that Malcolm X was, for example. But in his day, Martin Luther King was considered a radical, especially by the white establishment. And generally the arguments used against Martin Luther King was, yeah, you're right, there should be, by supposedly well-intentioned white people, was, and by the way, some black people too. You're right, there should be racial equality, there shouldn't be a two-tiered system, etc., but not yet, people aren't ready for what you're doing yet, integration, etc. And what did Martin Luther King say? Justice postponed is justice denied. So, and that's Martin Luther King, who today is not considered a radical, but in his time was. That's generally. And now I want to talk about this issue of marijuana and the way Martellus Bennett brought it up and why there's urgency there and why justice should not be postponed, because then it is denied. There is a marijuana problem in this country. There is an epidemic. But it doesn't have to do with the drug itself. It has to do with the laws enforced against marijuana, which disproportionately affect African-American people, Stephen A., and contribute to mass incarceration. It's a Schedule I drug. It shouldn't be. That's based on lies and hypocrisy and nonsense. There's also an opioid epidemic. That's real. That's addictive. It causes enormous damage to society, apart from its legal status, because of it's actually a problem. And they are prescribed as painkillers. And here what Martellus, I'm not even talking about the recreational use of marijuana, which if alcohol is the standard, obviously marijuana should be legal. It's less harmful than alcohol to the individual and certainly to society. I'm talking about for medical purposes, for medicinal purposes now, which everyone else likes to talk about first, because that's what Bennett's talking about. He's saying, hey, the stuff that we're prescribed is bad for you and dangerous and leads to bad consequences, negative results, not only for the individual, but on a societal level, and that is simply not the case for marijuana. The only reason that marijuana can be described as an epidemic, really, or the main reason, is because of the hypocritical laws and even cultural taboos based on ignorance and based on malice, really, because that's what's behind the propaganda, against it. That is his point. I believe that is an urgent point to make. I believe if you postpone justice, in this case, you are denying it. And I also believe that Martellus and his brother are willing to take certain risks and make certain sacrifices in order to lead on issues such as this.
Except the sacrifice wasn't his. He put the rest of the NFL players in the eye of the storm. Because when you make the statement that 90% of NFL players are doing it, you didn't take a position for yourself. You didn't say that he didn't go on national television and say, I use weed. He didn't say that. He said 90% of the players are using weed. If you were talking about yourself, then your point is valid. He's talking about the other players who may now end up getting fined, getting compromised, or having their images stigmatized in a negative fashion. Why? Because he felt the need to make that point, but he didn't dime out himself?
He didn't name names,
that's not how it works.
Had he I'm with you, had he named names. I don't think people take that 90% literally. How does he know? Has he done a survey? He's saying a lot more do than don't.
90% means, 90% means you're saying 9 out of 10 players use weed?
Right, yeah, basically everyone's doing it, he's saying, right?
Yeah.
He's not naming names. He's not naming names. Had he said, yeah, on this team ate that, now he's putting people under the microscope.
I'm saying your point is, to me, if you're going to speak of yourself. Don't speak for 90% of the league. Because when you do that, when a medical director of the league comes their way, what are we going to say then?
He probably should. A better way to say it is so many do, maybe the majority, maybe most of the people I encounter, etc. Still, how can he discuss it honestly without making that indictment?
Listen, I don't know. That was a riveting conversation, though, and clearly way deeper than the subject of marijuana. Appreciate you both, but we got to take a quick break. Go back to the NBA playoffs. Joel Embiid's status for the Sixers still up in the air, so should the process be worried about feeling the heat in the postseason? That's coming up tomorrow on First Take.
This is what I feel like when I wear regular shoes. Cramped,